Hello and welcome everyone to our session on navigating the fintech supplier market. Where to begin? So today we've got an all-star array of guests to debate this from the industry side, from the governance side, and of course from the fintech side. So I won't do any of them any injustice by trying my best to introduce their legendary status, but maybe as a table stakes opener, I'll just define where exactly we'll be focusing this conversation when we say fintech, as it's pretty broad. So for the purpose of this conversation, we're really focusing on those in the startup and scale up phase. So rather than necessarily the bigger incumbents, the old guard, really focusing on those newer players who are coming in and trying to stand out, as well as also from the other side of the coin, trying to understand where do they fit in the ecosystem. Anyway, enough about the table stakes. I'd love to do a quick round robin of introductions. And Rich, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, of course. Hi everyone. So I'm Rich Albury. I lead the payments, cash, ATM and business operations buying categories for Nationwide Building Society. It's a really broad role and really looking forward to sitting alongside my panel members today to discuss things like SaaS operations, on-prem software, managed services. We're increasingly seeing a shift towards fintech, but as Will's opening, we still obviously have a significant level of engagement with some of the more traditional suppliers as well. So we're really looking forward to this debate. Helen?
Hi everybody, it's great to be here. I'm Helene Panzerino and I have a foot in two camps, one in each camp. So one is the London Institute of Banking and Finance, where I'm the Associate Director for the Digital Centre, which is all things fintech and helping to educate the industry in all its aspects on fintech and to meet fintech founders and so on. The other half is me at Vacuum Labs, which is a Bratislava solutions house, where we're building fintech propositions largely in the digital banking area, but not solely. And I spend a lot of time in alternative finance and digital banking. My career and my entree into fintech was a series of what I'll call blank sheets of paper. I love a blank sheet of paper. So it was either being at Grant Thornton and helping to fund the fintechs and to feed in the SMEs in my network to the platforms back in 2012-14. Innovate Finance, blank sheet of paper to build out the events and education program. UCL, blank sheet of paper to build out the fintech course. You get the idea. But it was at Rainmaking, which is the parent company of Startup Bootcamp, where I created the Fintech Scale program for meaningful commercial engagement between Series A, B fintechs, and at that time, tier ones and card companies, but then morphed that into the smaller banks, the community banks level.
Callum?
Morning, everyone. Callum Hay. So I work for Form 3, so a scale-up, I guess you'd say now, particularly with the recent 160 million funding from existing investors and Goldman Sachs. I've got a history working for fintechs, but specifically within the payments domain. So for my sins, previously worked at FIS and now Form 3. So I've seen the kind of big side of fintech and then the smaller side as well. I won't take up too much time because I think we've got a pretty packed schedule, so pass over to Will and crack on.
Super. Thanks, everyone. And lastly, Will from Pangea. We're a go-to-market accelerator, and we're doing our best to referee this, so it's a bit of a fair debate or a fair fight. But I guess on the opening side, right? It's procurement is many different things, both for the supplier and of course for the buyer. But how should we ensure that the alignment of the growth plans of that business and the culture of that business match to the supplier's side? It's quite a tricky one, but Rich, I know it's a topic you're super passionate about, so I'd love to pass it to you and get some of your thoughts first.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Will. So I think let's start by saying that innovation and increased competition is rarely a bad thing. The question I think we all grapple with is how do you harness that, particularly in the heavily regulated environment that we all sit in. Outsourcing systems of record that are critical, mission critical to the operation of banks, building societies, and other major organisations. When those systems may have been managed by the same teams or same people for 20 to 30 years, is a complex challenge. Quite simply, running an RFP and awarding in a more traditional procurement sense is no longer enough. But the big question I think that we all are challenged with is, what is enough? How do you build up the trust, mutual understanding, and make sure that you are making the right decision? I think it's fair to say for everybody, it's certainly from experience an awful lot easier to implement technical change than it is to enact cultural change. And I think in a procurement sense, really, that is where we are having to change ourselves. So how do you align? How do you align culture and people alongside organisations that are growing, that don't have all the answers necessarily, but are more than willing to work with you to shape the agenda that you need? And I think it really does come down to people. As I say, running an RFP process that's paper-based, that can be fairly dry, is no longer just the sole answer. But what we've seen really start to work well is collaboration workshops, contracting for roadmap delivery. So there's actually some assurity that the promises that you see from a sales process has a direct route to commitment and a direct route to delivery once the contract has been signed. And for me, certainly flexible commercial models. If I think about some of the traditional incumbent vendors that we have, they are both traditional in their technology sense, but they tend to be traditional from a profit and loss and accounting perspective as well. So when you're faced with the challenge of growth plans, delivery for the future, needing to be flexible, not just in terms of delivery mindsets, but culturally as well, having a commercial model that doesn't have a big bang upfront procurement cost to it, but you can gradually work together to iterate the relationship over the course of time without significant buy-in or penalty up front is really important. But really, it comes down to people working together, to understand each other, and people working together really to co-create something and really embrace the principles of what fintechs can do, as opposed to liking the idea of fintech and then looking to stifle innovation, stifle what the art of possible is, with bringing your own organisational preconceived policies, ideas into that relationship.
So many nuggets in there. Callum, what do you think of that? Do you find that to be the same?
Yeah, I think definitely all about understanding specifically on a people front. From a fintech perspective, I think it's about understanding what the challenge is that the organisation that you're working with is facing, whether it's something that's quite generic, industry wide, or whether it's something specific, and then ultimately sitting down with the people there and understanding what makes them tick. So what the various different challenges that different parts of the business are facing, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's someone that's on a SecOps side of the coin. And once you kind of get down to the various different specific needs of those people, you can understand what the challenge they're facing is, and start to think of a solution that you can put in place that will have an optimum effect. If you kind of keep it very high level, then you end up with generic solutions that don't really fit the bill, and that's where I think the challenge has been in the past with organisations that either build themselves or buy, but put something in that on paper works, but actually for the organisation doesn't. There's far too many intricacies that need to be catered for as well.
I agree with both what both of you have said, and as you were talking, I was nodding and writing notes as well. Right, the point, Cam, you just made about having the challenge. You need to be clear about what it is that you're asking the fintech to do. With a challenge identified, sure, but the problem statement, and you'll know this being on the other side. If you're not clear in the problem statement for what you're actually trying to achieve, then it's impossible for the fintech to come up with a solution because they still don't understand what you want. And we go back to the point of having the internal culture and the people. It is about certain people will be more innovative than other people, and certain people will put their head above the parapet and take that chance in a large organization to create genuine innovation. But they will also own most of the time the business use case and the budget, because I think those days are gone where fintechs are, waiting for the crumbs to fall off the table or experimenting for £50,000 and then going down after that. They've matured much more rapidly in the last few years than perhaps the incumbent side of banking or financial services anticipated. And now as they scale, they have their own priorities as well, and they're not waiting anymore. So if they're not working with you, they'll work with someone else. So clarity of challenge and problem statement, who owns it and who has the budget for it. Gather all the team. So get procurement, get IT, get everybody in the upfront discussion so there are no surprises or jammers later on. Get it all out, upfront. Have those co-creation sessions, but have them over a short period of time, not 10 or 11 months. It might be 8 days where you have everyone together. You have, as a scale fintech, an existing framework from some other solution or some experience you've had before, which makes it easier for you to bring that if you're clear on what you're trying to solve, and also easier to understand the procurement process and the internal selling process. So I think all that together, once you've decided what the model is it a satellite? Is it an acquisition? Is it pure vendor, or is it a co-create partner for a new product or service? Before that, how does that fit into my tech stack? What is the real value add for my customer? Why am I doing this in the first place? And have I got everybody on board for going forward? All very important.
I think, Helen, in response to that, there is certainly a balance between having absolute clarity on what the requirement is, but then having the flexibility and an agile mindset to be able to co-create and find some of those answers together. I think certainly the days of building a business case with 5,000 requirements and a year-long timeline are long behind us. I certainly hope so. But from a procurement perspective, thinking about how you contract for flexibility so that you can have that journey, so that you can discuss and embrace design principles that within your own organization you may not know or have that opportunity to develop roadmaps together. And as I said, have those commercial frameworks where you can absolutely change tack or flex the approach as you go through is really important. And Callum, I couldn't agree more when you say understanding each other's hot buttons is absolutely key. Again, I hope the days of win-lose negotiation is a long way behind us. It's never been more important than in the fintech space. And at Nationwide, one of the key things that we've done is make sure that we understand the priorities of any organisation, but fintechs in particular. Things like prompt payment code, signing up to some of the key charters that really encourage innovation and growth within some of our partner ecosystem is something that we've really been keen to drive through. But clearly there's always work. I often talk about Nationwide being from Venus and fintechs from Mars. But equally, there are several good marriages that I'm sure we're all part of and know. And you just need to find a way of making it work. Opposites sometimes attract, and it's just about how you harbour that environment to talk and understand what each other's needs are.
There was a point. Sorry.
Go on, Helen.
And I was just going to say to Rich, there's a point also where, and Callum, you've just said you raised 160 million. You have to get an understanding of the fact, are they committed to us for the 3, 4, 5 years that we're going ahead if we co-create something, or is this a fundraise to an exit? Have they got enough resource to put on this? Because if they're expanding globally as a fintech, have they still got the people to come forward and do it with us? And if you invest as the financial provider, what's your thesis? Is it for you? Is it for something to create together that you can also sell to other financial institutions? So there are so many nuances in the journey as well.
Yeah, I think it's got to be about openness. And Rich, you talked about understanding the challenges. Openness has got to be one of the main things, and a willingness to actually change your initial thought process. So one of the things that Form 3 are quite stringent on, as an example, is we have a standardized platform, and that is kind of the fundamental element that allows us to provide a service to all types of organizations, and it's a common code base. So we can't be going to one organization and kind of accepting everything, and then another and saying no, we can't, because you end up with ultimately a version of software for each different organization, which is, you know, kind of the classic mistake that organizations have made in the past. So there's got to be an openness from both sides to adapt and accept certain key points. But I think ultimately going forward, we'll move more and more towards a service-based, or at least a cloud-based society within financial services, and that has kind of certain principles and fundamental points to it, and that will ultimately drive a behaviour change for those that haven't done already.
No, I agree, Callum.
Sorry. After you, Rich, go on.
After you. I was going to say, Callum, the adopt and adapt mindset is one of those cultural things that is difficult to overcome. But what I'm certainly seeing increasingly more is where you can build out those relationships, where you have that trust. It allows you to focus on what your core business purposes are. Nationwide is not a technology provider. It's a provider of savings, mortgages, and high level of customer service. So what is it that we need to do to make sure that we are focusing on what we excel at, whilst bringing in other organisations such as Form 3, Money Hub, 10X, and others in the market, that really allow us to focus on, as I say, what we are here to be good at.
Absolutely.
Super. And so obviously there are some big names getting thrown out there on the fintech scale list, but what can, particularly those who are in the maturing cycle, what can those types of fintechs do to build relationships when engaging with procurement? Rich, I guess that one's really for you, but on the flip side, right, how can the buyers cut through some of that hype to find a true partner? Are there any key criteria that one should be looking for? And maybe Helen, very curious, having sat on both sides, to get your perspective on that.
So I think some of the things that come to mind on both sides, to be honest, is if you're the fintech on the procurement side, find out, ask if there's anything that you can do before the process starts. Are there things, forms you can fill in, places you can file, badges you can get, anything that you need that you can start before the formal process starts? Because there are some workings that can happen before day one. I think we've gone past it now. There used to be this sense of, well, once I sign the contract, why am I not going forward? Why do I have to keep selling internally? Why are there lots of jams? Why does it take time? I think we're all aware of that now. And if you're a fintech of a certain size, Callum, you'll know this. You know that already, and you have to anticipate that and build it into the conversation. But back to the point on communication, openness, transparency, set a timeline. So the pledge, Rich, that you mentioned, where you might say 6 or 9 months, we will get through X, Y, and Z with milestones. Stick to it and make somebody responsible for that, because otherwise we're going to just be paying lip service to it. But there are regulations, obviously, and it is a regulated environment, which you said in the beginning, and we can't escape that. You want to make sure that the fintech is compliant and is adhering to regulations. Any adverse press or news stories that come out about some of the fintechs as they grow and the growing pains of a scaling fintech, going from agile, exciting, pumped up, break it fast, to, oh my God, I'm in a regulated space and I actually need to be a bit more controlled, is difficult for the fintech. And they have to have a wrist slap from time to time, and then bring in maybe some more long experienced industry people to bring things back to balance again, because they're dealing with a large regulated entity on the other side.
Super. And I guess, Rich or Callum, I guess you guys have both sides of the coin here to talk about, but very curious. I mean, Callum, what's your experience in that area and how one builds those relationships?
So it kind of comes back down to the people element, right? And we talked about this before, and I always end up talking about it. But that's got to be the fundamental piece for partnering. I think there's a lot of organizations out there that can do a lot of really cool, really neat things in the fintech space, and until you start talking with some of them, you kind of don't really know, other than kind of snippets that you'll hear online. You don't really know what it is exactly that they might do, or how they might work with you as an organization, what type of culture they have. So again, it comes down to talking with the people within an organization, within the bank, within the fintech, and understanding whether there is that ability to come up with a common solution. Because ultimately, I don't really agree with the concept of having the buyer and the vendor. I think it's ultimately two parties that come together to do something. If you kind of keep everyone separate, then you end up with that win-lose scenario that Rich talked about earlier on. Whereas if you create kind of one common team, then you have a group of people that are working towards a common challenge. One side is going to get a benefit out of it, having a nice new shiny customer and a new logo to put on their wall, and the other one is going to benefit from a different solution and resolving a number of challenges that can either be costly, that can be regulatory conditions. So it comes down to talking, and ultimately that's something that I don't think has necessarily been done before, particularly because you had a very stringent procurement process that would kind of keep people at certain distances, because you didn't want talking to the wrong person or getting so-and-so involved. Whereas that getting everyone in a room and sitting down and hashing things out is kind of second to none. You really need to do that to understand, can we work with this organization, or is the barrier just too great and it's not going to work for us?
I agree with both points there. For me, there's always a balance. There's always a balance between creating that environment where there's complete open dialogue, with the understanding that we are in a heavily regulated, risk-orientated industry. So striking that balance and being open to strike that balance is absolutely key. And I like to think about things in threes. There are some things that you just have to do. You have to have the ticket to the party to enter, and that very much is the regulatory space. There are some things that you can flex on, and that, Callum, is for me absolutely where the conversation can come in. And then there are elements that you just don't know. If you knew everything, you probably wouldn't be outsourcing to a fintech, and you'd be doing it yourself. So really breaking it down into the three things, and getting that mutual understanding of each other's absolute must-haves is really important. And I do think that the conversational side of things is key. But running the process, and Helen, to your earlier point, delivering on what you say you will deliver, both sides, is again never more critical than in the fintech environment. I often talk about tell me, show me, prove it. And there is a lot of excitement, there's a lot of energy in the fintech market, but then seeing that through into performance delivery, sounds dull, but complying to a contract is really, really key in the industry that we work in. So really, tell me, show me, prove it is a principle that I like to see. Big banks and building societies no longer just telling fintechs or traditional organisations what the rules of procurement are, but again, Callum, to your point, talking together and making sure that you've got that flexible journey set out so that you can co-create and everybody achieves the outcomes that they're working towards.
Rich, as you're speaking, it's reminding me of having a space that's outside of business as usual. There are banks like in Sao Paulo, for example, where they have a filter almost between the business units and the fintechs, and it's that kind of innovation space, but it's active innovation, because we've been speaking about the process, but sometimes in the financial institution, people are so hung up and wedded to the safety of the process that they're unable to open up for the opportunity for the fintech to come in at the time where they could be most helpful, because it's not in the process. And we still have this push me, pull me kind of problem, and understandably so, because you're in a large organization, you work in a certain way, it moves at a certain speed, it moves by itself. Is the value of having that neutral space almost between, which I suppose in some ways is what innovation is partly there to do, the innovation departments, but having that neutral space outside of business as usual to create and then to plug it back in. Too far from the reality or a good idea? Sorry
We've
to
got an
get and ask
innovation
a
lab
question as the moderator.
not at all. If we've got an innovation lab in Sao Paulo, I think I'm more than happy to do our next roundtable from there. For me, there's a time and a place. There's absolutely a time and a place for separate innovation labs and for us all to embrace innovation. I think, Helene, to your question, what I've seen work really well is separate areas, if you like, agitating to cause a long-lasting effect. So at Nationwide, I know we have an innovation lab, but innovation should and needs to be in all of us. If we don't innovate, quite simply, we get left behind. So innovation needs to be in all of us. And actually, for me, we all need to understand and develop our own skill sets, capabilities, and frameworks within the procurement context that allows innovation to grow, as opposed to it being outside of the traditional procurement function.
I think there's also the element, Ellen, you talked about process, and personally, I'm a bit of a stickler for process, but the condition that I always have is it can't be process for process sake, because you then are just following, it's the classic sheep example. You just end up following the crowd. If you have, and it's about having the right people, I think, in the right areas. It's not to say one person doesn't fit in an organization, but in a certain area they can really make waves because they're someone that refuses to follow a process that doesn't serve any purpose. And if you get those people in the right places, then they start to kind of clean out the weeds and allow people to think a bit more creatively. And that's where you get innovation, even outside of an innovation lab. You get people really thinking outside the box. Okay, how could we do this? And then quite possibly, and I've seen it before, where you have people within banks and building societies that are actually going to a Fintech and saying, I've got this idea and I want to do this. Is it possible? And then actually you get that kind of co-creation or a Fintech that will go away and say, okay, well, we're happy to go and build that and we'll provide it as a service. And that's partly the where Form3 actually started is an idea that came up within the confines of a bank by someone thinking outside of the box.
I completely agree, Callum. And go on, Helen.
No, I was going to say I can't comment as being part of a large organization. Rich, you can. Whether people have the permission to be that innovative and to try and fail from the top down. Have we got there yet? Because that's been a conversation that's gone on forever, isn't it? Top down, bottom up, got to be driven by the top of the organization to say it's okay to try and fail.
We're getting there. It's okay to fail, but not on a huge scale. I think talking about innovation labs, innovation teams, what they are doing for us is giving us options and showing us there is a different way. And I've certainly got a number of colleagues that have done that for me and have helped me shape my mindset in the confines of what we have. So is it okay to fail? Absolutely. Is it okay to fail on a monumental scale? No. So striking that balance, being open to innovation, open to collaboration, but making sure it's always done in a safe way is something that we all need to make sure that we are living by.
Yeah.
Super topic, and so many nuggets in there. Of course, do your prep work, right? But it sounds like resounding through is like the people element, right? And that shift from, Callum, to your point, from the vendor-buyer relationship to a really conducive win-win arrangement, which feels much more natural for the co-build model, for this idea of collaborative. Really, really cool. And yeah, Helen, I'm going to pinch business as unusual as a way to launch and innovate new ideas. That's super cool. And Callum, you touched on the fact, one of the points there about that co-build, where even those ideations end up building out incredibly successful companies like yours. But how do you sort of balance that build versus buy debate that's always ongoing. I mean, Rich, to go right back to the conversation that you mentioned at the start, you've got the folks who've been in the bank for a long, long time, building incredibly, important processes. How does one take that debate and say we go through the build route, or we're going to actually invest and buy in new technology that's up from outside? Callum, super curious to get your views.
So it's a really difficult one, actually, I think, because to kind of define the terms, the build is, in my opinion, I don't want to offend anyone here, but I think is the old school way of doing things. I want to create a solution for X, and so I'm going to put a team together, and I'm going to say, right, that's what you need to do, and then you go and build it. Now, there are benefits to that in that, we talked about it earlier, timelines. You have accountability. You have what you think is a control on cost, but is actually only a semblance of, because once you've got that end result to get to, you kind of keep on pushing and pushing and pushing, and a lot of the time your budget kind of ends up being far outweighed that you would have spent if you'd have bought. And typically speaking, build is done on legacy tech. So you're talking on-premise solutions. The main reason being, although cloud is available now for organizations to build on, it tends to be something that is still a bit of a touchy subject, particularly in financial services. And so there is an element of build that's happening within banks, but and building societies, but it's still rather limited. And so the benefits there, like I touched on, are the accountability, and then the main one there as well is flexibility and being able to choose to have a bespoke solution. So actually going and really focusing on the key points that you need to solve. That does come with some pitfalls, being that you will push to build something that fits all of your specific needs, when in actual fact, that's not necessarily a bespoke challenge. That's something that might be industry wide, and so you've gone and built a very specific solution for something that's actually a common challenge, and that means money ultimately. It's very costly to maintain. You've then got the buy, which again comes into two categories. So to define them, on-prem, so legacy or cloud. On-prem, you have similar benefits to the build. You can build something that's very bespoke, very specific for you, and because you're buying, you're going out to the experts. And as Rich mentioned earlier, you're kind of putting trust in someone that does that for a living. And building societies and banks are financial institutions. That's what they're good at. It's not to say that they can't do tech, but I think if you put one against the other, that the fintech's going to be tipping it most of the time. So you're getting that expertise from them. They've seen and worked with lots of different organizations, and so they've got a lot of experience in how to resolve certain challenges. The downside of that comes with again, cost. Can be very expensive. It's a very specific type of cost. So generally speaking, very, very big capex. Initial spend is sometimes astronomical. And you've not really got a foreseeable or predictable ongoing spend. The way that the industry works with rulebook changes, with regulatory changes, you kind of just have them pop up on you, and then you've got to go and do that, and that might be another year's project. So when you've got a team of 50 people for a year, they've got to do, you kind of take you focus away from innovation, and you're just working on BAU all the time. So you're kind of a step behind the curve. The benefits for a buy with modern tech, so I refer to it more as service versus product, but the service, so you look at SaaS solutions, and that's applicable across the board. You've got organizations like ServiceNow that do service management as a SaaS solution, and then other ones like ourselves that do payments. We provide payments as a service. And we've benefited a little bit from the advancements of cloud. Over the last couple of years, there's been some real advancements in cloud, and particularly the regulator getting on board and saying, okay, I'm happy, and allowing financial institutions to move their critical infrastructure onto a cloud-based service. That was kind of the big blocker before. But the benefits there are, typically speaking, low capex. So initial onboarding costs are minimal. You have a a standardized service, something that lots of different customers are using, so a multi-tenant solution, and you then benefit from a low and predictable OPEX. Because you're using a standard solution, you've not got to go and do any maintenance or regulatory changes yourself. That's all taken care of by your provider. So it's moving more to as a service model, and as a result, you benefit from costs. You move away from big, large, bespoke solutions, and probably more importantly, you don't end up in a situation in 20 years' time where you've got a solution for every different scheme that you're running. Every different regulatory change, you've got an add-on, and so it becomes this behemoth of an estate that is nigh impossible to manage. And if you do manage it, it's extremely expensive. So I've kind of thrown a load of stuff at you there, but the headline points for me are as a service is where we're going as an industry. From a cost model, it makes more sense. From a general industry best practice, it makes sense. That's not to say that the benefits I mentioned for building yourself aren't still there. They are, absolutely. You can fix your specific challenge. The advice I would give to anyone that's looking at doing that is go and talk to your friends. We're such a close-knit industry that I think we'd struggle to not have a friend that knows someone at a bank in the industry. If you pick a bank, you've got some common connection there. So go and talk to some of the other people there, some of the other building societies, and understand what their challenges are, and see really if what you've got and what you're seeing is a specific organisation challenge, or whether it's a industry challenge and you can benefit from a bit more of a standardised solution.
Super comprehensive. I don't know if anyone else has a perspective they want to build on. Rich or Helene, or did Callum nail it?
Callum,
I'm happy to.
yeah.
Go on, Helene. I went first last time.
No, go. So I was going to say, Callum really did nail it. And the point of, I love that was something specific to your organization, or something you can have from the industry. I think people worried also about the IP when they were outsourcing things, who's holding on to it. And you can still own your own IP and outsource parts of a build, and have people that work together to integrate solutions. It is faster. It is often less expensive. It's and I think those are the two things. We see sometimes people still running parallel internal and external builds, and that I suppose we'll see less of it as we get more comfortable with the fact that there are external providers in this SaaS type environment, but you still own your own IP. I think that was critical.
One thing that I did fail to mention, and it's quite an important one, one of the benefits of cloud solutions nowadays as well is the microservices element. So I talked about build being able to have a bespoke solution, but one of the benefits of microservices now is that you can still have a standardized solution with small intricacies that sit on your estate, and they provide you that little tailored element that you might be looking for to solve a very specific challenge. And they're kind of bolt-ons, you'd say, to a standard platform. I mean, confirmation of pay is a prime example, something that's rather small, but actually is a significant challenge for a lot of organizations. And one of the things that we're trying to solve now, actually, by creating a common platform where everyone can benefit from a cost perspective, but also solve that kind of quite small little challenge that's causing a lot of issues for a lot of people.
I think to counter slightly, the engineering and product teams within any bank or building society will be immense. I'm continually astounded by the brains that surround me. There is no, for me, certainly generic answer whether you should buy or build. And Callum, to your point earlier, it does very much come down to the nature of services. Do you need something that's absolutely bespoke, or is there a level of standardization? For me, two other major considerations come into play. It's what are your business priorities? Where do you want to put your engineering efforts? Where is it best placed? And secondly, what is your risk appetite? By outsourcing, by buying, there is a perceived, whether it's true or not, a perceived reduction in control. you do have a level of decreased control over things like your extended supply chain, the future direction of an organization, what goes on to a roadmap. So really, there's an awful number of factors that play into any debate around buy versus build, and really it does come down to what it is, when it is, and really what level of control you want to maintain, not just in the short term, but over the life of any engagement.
It's an interesting one that you mentioned that, and I think that's one of the things that works quite well with. I know other organisations, in addition to ourselves, do that, but with advisory boards. So customers of a certain size that work with us have a seat at the table, and I think that's fundamental and was really important for yourselves, Rich, when you realise that you've actually got a seat at the table and you can kind of push that direction as well. I think that definitely must give some degree of comfort in that you know we're sticking around and we're listening to our customers, which is it's nice to hear.
It doesn't. That's just a great example for me of the tell me, show me, prove it. Rather than saying yes, absolutely, we're committed to working with you and for you to shape our roadmap. Actually, there is a mechanism for those conversations to take place. A great example, Callum.
It's always nice to see partners getting along like this, and I guess Rich, I'm curious because you talked a lot about like your framework, tell me, show me, prove it. How do you know which provider or solution is right for you? How do you think about that process? Do you have any frameworks? Really curious to understand that.
I think you only know when a product or service goes live, and the people that will tell you whether or not you've got it right are your customers. So at Nationwide, we've seen significant growth in our current account estates and with mortgages over the years. So we think we're getting it right. But it's not something that you can measure, certainly from my perspective, at contract signature or a go live. It's very much something that needs monitoring. It's something that needs working on, not just at the initial stages of a relationship, but through contract, through the operational management of the relationship. And as I say, for me, your customers absolutely have the voice, and they will be the ones that tell you whether you've got it right.
Super. And Helene, obviously you've advised a lot of these companies around, finding your end partner. Do you have any frameworks or any ways that you think about those approaches on selecting who is right?
I mean, I think Rich is right. The proof is in the pudding, obviously, and in the testing, let's say. But if you're aligned on what you're trying to achieve, I see it, for example, with Calgera, when we're looking at vulnerability and the vulnerability score, it's something that's going to be regulated. It's something that's super important as people in the business, that you protect customers or you help customers and support them who are deemed to be vulnerable or feel vulnerable. So there's beyond the financial reasoning there's a moral or an ethical, or there are other ways that you want to engage with your financial services provider. You have to have some of that authenticity in there. It's not just about the money all the time. I think the other thing is that you have time now to get to know people. There are so many pitch events, panel events, are all great, aren't they? Obviously she says to put them down, but people writing, people speaking, people podcasting. We're going back to meeting people in a hybrid way now. Years and years ago, there wasn't a way to actually get to know people apart from popping over to one of the levels somewhere in the funky part of the city and being able to meet people, or through an accelerator. We can engage much more now. So you can get to know the founders, you can get to know the teams, they can get to know you. They can also speak to people that you've worked with before. So that for me is great, because the same way as it is with funding, it's a relationship. This is a relationship. And if you were going into a relationship, you'd want to speak to people that worked with them before. You want to get to know more of them over a longer period of time. You'd want to understand, yes, the tech and where you come together, but the organizational objectives, and as I said, the moral and the ethical side of it also factor now, especially as we think more about purpose and authenticity as the generations change, and they want that from their financial provider.
So
All really good points, Helen.
relationships do still count. Sorry, after you, Rich.
I was going to say really, really good points, Helen. In terms of a framework, I entirely agree. The way you select a partner, a vendor, isn't just by a does it work today and will it work in the future, 0 to 10 score. It's very much about what's important to you. And if relationship and ways of working are important, that should be part of your procurement process. They can be scored if you want them to be. Due diligence calls, reference calls, again, they can be scored. So really for me, it's about building up the entire picture before you make the decision, and making sure that that things that are maybe less traditional and less familiar to procurement functions are factored into the procurement process, so that those people, those relationships, those ways of working, those sustainability, those ethical side of things come into the process and aren't just discarded as a nice to have, because those are more likely the things that you'll need to lean on when things get difficult.
It's a difficult one for me to chip in on, being on the other side of the fence, but I would generally speaking say that if you've got someone in front of you that's looking to understand individuals and not just the institution, then that's a good starting point, because they're looking for the specific challenges that each person's facing, as well as the institution as a whole, whether you're a building society and you are looking after your members, or whether you're a top bank that's only ever looking at the bottom line. Once you kind of get that, and then look at the people as well, you start to build a bigger picture. And I think if someone's looking at that, then you know that they're willing to partner and work with you.
Super. So relationships still count. It's very much the proof will be in the pudding as you get to the finish line. And I guess just to come to the last question, just conscious of all of our times and all of our listeners. For the fintechs trying to stand out, Helen, your comment, right? There is a ton more content and channels to engage and ways to learn, but it is really busy, and the marketplace is getting noisier. I'd be really curious to go around the room and just get from each of our panelists, what is the one top tip you'd give to someone in the fintech market, or it could be on the other side of the conversation, as the building society or the bank? What is your one top tip that they should be thinking about as they go in to build those relationships with their buyers? Sorry to use the term, Callum, but it's easier to give it a category. And Helen, maybe you could help. You could give your perspective on that first.
I think because there is so much noise, you have to be, for me, striving to own a marketplace with an authentic voice on a constant basis. So not just pop up every once in a while and say something to get a social media spike. Really believe it and try not to be all things to all people, but to not just accumulate customers, but own a space and do it with authenticity and do it regularly.
Who's next?
I'll happily jump in, although I'm struggling with that one. I think listening is got to be the fundamental thing. Listening to needs and also to internal stakeholders. So as a fintech, listening to people that have had the experience. I mean, I'm lucky enough to work with a lot of people that have spent decades inside banks and building societies, and so know and understand those challenges firsthand, not just from a fintech perspective. So listen to what they've got to say, listen to what your customers have got to say, and you'll build a picture.
I think for me, one top tip is difficult. I might do 1.5 and just build on one of Helen's. So absolutely own your space. You are creating something, and if you don't believe in it, others won't. So own your space. be clear on your proposition, and clearly there is a bit of deviation, but absolutely stay to your committed purpose. So that's the half. The one would probably be barriers to doing business. Really think about not just the technology and the people, but think about how you can sell to organizations that may have varying risk appetites, or relatively new organizations that are scaling. Think about how you can sell the services and products in a way that gradually gives confidence to any larger organization, so that it's not a relatively binary decision up front, but it's one that you can work together to make sure is the right decision over the course of time.
Classic. You'd think I would have got better at this after so many months and months in lockdown, but I was just saying, thanks. I was banging away all my notes, writing down all of Rich's tips. But guys, super. Thank you so much, Helen, Callum, Rich, for your insights. Super interesting. It's all we've got time for. But for anyone who's watching this, we'll all be available during the event in the channels. So ping us or hit any of us up on LinkedIn. I'm sure everyone would love to continue the debate with those who are listening. So thanks again, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Helen, Callum, Rich, thanks.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.